This afternoon we're going to do a little review of the teachings that Choden Rinpoche has given here in Land of Medicine Buddha in 2004. And as some people, the first time obviously will come a little bit late, we'll do some meditation near the end of the session rather than the beginning, and see if, first of all, if you have any questions about what Rinpoche has talked about. Basically, we've begun essentially from where Rinpoche left off last year on the subject of refuge. And in some of our other classes, we've talked about the causes of refuge. I wonder, those of you who didn't attend those classes, do you know, Venerable, what the causes of refuge are? Rinpoche mentioned them in his fear and faith. So,
fear of
faith?
Fear and rebirth in one of the lower realms.
That would be the lowest kind of refuge, because the different levels of fear or preoccupation or apprehension, if you have fear about all the suffering of samsara and you take refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha for that reason, that's a higher kind of refuge, just the refuge of the individual of intermediate scope. And if you take refuge out of an apprehension that at present you're not able to help all sentient beings who are experiencing excruciating suffering, but the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha can help you attain enlightenment to bring their suffering to an end and put them in bliss, that would be kind of refuge of the person of great scope, of the Bodhisattva path. Even in Tantra, there's other more sophisticated ways of having the reason, the rationale, the cause that's bringing about refuge can be more subtle. So some fear or preoccupation and faith in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So of those two, one of them was more or less covered before last year and in our preliminary lectures this year. That is the fear of, for the person of lowest scope, the fear of suffering of the lower realms. So we talked about that and how death is inevitable, and when you die, this is not the end. Definitely you're going to be born in one of these realms. So this year we've talked about the how to develop faith, and one of the ways to do that is to start to understand the qualities. That's one of the subjects that we've been mentioning so far. The qualities of Buddha, qualities of Dharma, qualities of Sangha, and then just Buddha himself has all sorts of subdivisions, right? The qualities of the Buddha's body, his holy speech and holy mind. So how about it? Does anyone have any questions about that? Don, you have a question?
Yeah, just going over this reasons for refuge again.
You're going over the what? The reasons for refuge, right?
For the lowest motivation or lowest scope, maybe, is fear of being born in the lower realms. And then you said there was different motivation maybe for the Mahayana path. I didn't quite get that.
So also your understanding of how Buddha can help you also changes, but the fear, this literally how we could translate this, it cause becomes more sophisticated, more subtle. It's not only fear for the person of intermediate scope, it's not merely fearing rebirth in the lower realms and wishing to be born somewhere in the upper realms. That person sees all of samsara as suffering, right? This you know, you're asking about the third scope, but anyway, just to make connection. So that person develops a more sophisticated sense of apprehension that if I'm born in cyclic existence, it's going to be the same thing all over again. What was it Yogi Berra said? It's deja vu all over again. Remember? So, you might think, oh, to be born as a god would be great, but even that has an end. You deplete your virtuous karma, but even that experience in the upper realms is not real happiness. So that's the kind of reasoning a person of intermediate scope would use to develop that special kind of refuge. The person of great scope now doesn't, they have to take as a basis the possibility of attaining liberation for themselves, but in developing compassion for sentient beings and developing the thought of bodhicitta, they take special Mahayana refuge because they see that only the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the Mahayana Sangha, the Buddha teaching, the Mahayana teachings and the Mahayana doctrine, can actually help them to achieve that goal of enlightenment for the welfare of sentient beings. Only Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha can eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings and lead them into enlightenment. So that's more subtle. And in Tantra, there's even more, even of the different levels of Tantra, different kinds of ways that one would take refuge. If you do the Vajrasattva purification, there's some verses at the very beginning in the elaborate Vajrasattva sadhana of I go for refuge to the Dakas and Dakinis and the protectors and the empowering deities and so forth, and my guru. So there, the fear of dualistic appearance and impure view and so forth are the things that one would be in various levels apprehensive about, and taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha and this extended Sangha, say, in Tantra. Does that make sense? No? Okay. Okay. Someone else? Yeah, it's just a small group right now, but now you always have good questions. Do you have any doubts about what we've talked about so far? What if I asked you a question? Okay. Can you take refuge in let's say your hairdresser, the movie theater? Don't they provide a way to escape from suffering? Movies, come on, good movie. Why not? You can't take refuge in that? You can't take refuge in a good meal when you're hungry?
Into the any other than free from samsara or free from the
That's good, but it does say when we come to the more details about refuge, it is possible to depend upon worldly beings, let's say gods, Brahma and so forth, but not ultimately. Even sometimes people do pujas with the local spirits, local protectors, or the Nagas, asking for various kind of help, but never taking refuge in them ultimately. That would be a great mistake. So it's the same way that I think the example sometimes given, the local politicians in your neighborhood. Maybe if there are potholes in your street, do you know what that means? Holes in the street. You might bring a cake or, I don't know, some check or something to the local politicians and please request them for some help, but you wouldn't rely upon them for your, from life to life, right? But you can, for very limited reasons, ask for the help of worldly beings. Okay, yeah, Venerable. Good.
187.
So we're talking about the translation of the Lam Rim Chenmo, right? Because that's what Rinpoche is teaching, right?
So Rinpoche spoke quite a bit about the teaching. The third paragraph from the bottom, the Bhagavan Buddha possesses infinite and limitless good qualities. So the third sentence down in that paragraph, the teaching creates and governs them. So I didn't quite catch everything. Rinpoche explained that quite a little bit about. I believe he said creates means that Buddha is an emanation of the Dharma, that is a higher training in wisdom. That's what I got. And then the governs them. Was that relating to the higher training and concentration?
I think Rinpoche, through Yeshe Gyatso, said that referred to the higher training of ethics, governs them, or owns them, and that they arise from the teachings refers to the higher training of concentration. So whether that's the actual order in the Tibetan sentence, or whether there actually is the order, first it mentions higher training of wisdom, higher training of ethics or morality, then higher training of concentration, at least in the English translation. So I didn't check the Tibetan to see whether that's the same order or not. That's interpreting that verse. That's what is understood supposedly. Okay, but let's talk rather than that detail. Yeah.
I wrote this. I just want to make sure. Basically, I've couldn't find the book, but now it's there. I believe Rinpoche said that one's need for the teaching, the Buddha's need would equal the suffering of an individual.
The Buddha's need.
I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The Buddha's compassion would equal the need of the sentient being.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that's what he said.
Well, I don't know what point. It sounds like when we were talking about the necessity for us to have faith in our mind for the Buddha to be able to help. Because the Buddha has the compassion to, and the power to lead us out of all kinds of suffering. But it depends on, from our side, the receptivity, sort of like the crack of your, opening up the crack of your stone-like mind to let the blessings actually take root. It's a two-way kind of engagement. The Buddhas themselves, if it were simply due to their compassion and that they would lead us out of suffering just out of their compassion, we didn't have to do anything from our side, we should all be enlightened by now because the Buddhas have infinite compassion and they would have come and helped us out and so forth. But it depends. The Buddhas can only do so much. It depends on the accumulation of merit of the sentient beings and their freedom from obstructions, karmic obstructions, and their faith. And so the faith is, this cause of refuge is very, very important. That is, even though the Buddhas have infinite compassion that equals the suffering of sentient beings, so to speak, unless we have faith from our own side and openness of our mind, the Buddha's enlightened activity is not actually going to be able to help. So I think that may be the context of what you're talking about.
Okay, that's where I was missing it.
Okay.
I was trying to find the passage.
Okay. So, yeah.
I'm curious why very often when we do refuge, we first take refuge in the Guru, then Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And Tsong Khapa doesn't mention that in the Lam Rim text here.
So usually,
In various kinds of tantric practices and sadhanas, there is the taking of refuge in the Guru first. In the general Mahayana, the Bodhisattva yana, the Paramita yana, the practice of the perfections and so forth, there is not, at the start, initially, an explicit emphasis on this kind of fourfold refuge. Usually we say threefold refuge, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So the emphasis on taking refuge in the Guru as equal to, identical to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is something that is expressed more in Tantra. So those particular verses where you hear, I go for refuge to the Guru, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, like in Lama Chopa and things like that, that's always or generally from a tantric perspective. There may be some perspectives where there might be a fourfold refuge, including the Guru, in the general Mahayana, Paramitayana. You know what I mean by Paramitayana? The Bodhisattva's teachings, all of the Buddha's teachings on the perfection of wisdom, the sutras, and so forth. But there's a lot of mention in the importance of relying on the Guru and how one can accelerate one's path by relying on the Guru. But that particular emphasis on the Guru, taking refuge in the Guru, is something that's more in Tantra. So sometimes when you meet people that are learned and practiced in the Theravada tradition, they might think that it's, especially if they've grown up in that, say if they were born in Thailand or something, or one of the countries, Burma or whatever, they might think that that's an aberration, older monks, and that one would take refuge in a person, the Guru, the physical manifestation. So it's not something you'd find in the Theravada at all. You find mention of it in the general Mahayana, Bodhisattva path, but in the Mahayana tantric path, that's where there's the emphasis on that. Okay. Yeah, Leo.
In the Lam Rim, it talks about the fact that the three scopes, the small, middling, and great scope, are actually stages on the path, and that you have to go through one to attain the other, to eventually attain full enlightenment. And I'm wondering, because in my practice and in what I've seen, it seems like
You're way beyond.
you're jumping around. I'm jumping around, and I'm not. And the impression I got, and this was from reading Geshe Sopa's text this morning, was he never explicitly said it, so I'm sure I was inferring it. But the inference that I seemed to get out of it was that you had to attain one to move on to the next.
So this is something that the Lamas mention quite a bit. In some day, the different ways of presenting the teachings and practicing. In some earlier times, some teachers would say, for instance, if they were living in seclusion and practicing Lam Rim, this kind of teaching, let's say, or something similar before it was called stages of the path, sort of, the kind of meditations that could lead one sequentially. They would give a disciple a meditation to do, and the disciples would perhaps live around them in the area, the hills, the forest, the mountains, whatever, and they would meditate on that continually, and they'd come back and explain their understanding over time, their experiences, and if they had problems, they'd ask questions. And the teacher might not give the next meditation at all until they'd had some degree of realization of that first teaching. Like, say, for instance, how to rely upon the spiritual guide. They wouldn't teach other things until the students had some understanding of that, or understanding and experience of the life of leisure and endowment, we might call perfect human rebirth, before you taught impermanence and death and so forth. So that's the one way that it was taught, and that that would make things very authentic, because people would be completely qualified for the next meditation because they would have the basis for it. But in this day and age, because we don't put much emphasis, we don't put much effort in meditation, we don't have the time, we say, and we don't have a great degree of accumulation of merit, many obstacles. So if that were the way that the only way the teachings were presented, we would never have any understanding of the path. So many of the great teachers, that's not the only way the teachings have ever been presented. That was like one kind of experiential way that they were presented by yogis and yoginis in isolation. They would give one teaching and then lead to the next. But the Buddhist teachings are open. All of the sutra teachings are known, and one can study them, and even these stages of the path one can study. But and in doing so, one can get a clear view of where you're going, and that can be kind of like a what's the word? I'm going to say incitement, or like the carrot. You can see, well, I could develop bliss. I could develop, these good qualities. I could develop clairvoyance. At first, you might, or freedom from the lower realms, and freedom from samsara. And then when you try to do those meditations, let's say concentration to develop good qualities or other things, or you try to practice the Bodhisattva's deeds of compassion, you think, oh, this is what I want to practice. Just taking those very high practices in mind, you recognize that you can't really actualize them yet, and that as the stages of the path are laid out, just as you said, in order to actualize those teachings, you need the ones that precede them. So then you sometimes go in reverse order, and you go back to the beginning again and put your emphasis on that. So in general, when people practice the Lam Rim, it's suggested that every day you do a panoramic meditation, a glance meditation at the whole path, from beginning to end. Let's say from the beginning, from reliance upon the spiritual guide, perfect human rebirth, death and impermanence, suffering of the lower realms, refuge, karma, then the meditations of the individual intermediate scope and high scope. And then also, if you're practiced, also the stages of Tantra, the lower Tantras and the generation stage and completion stage of highest Yoga Tantra and so forth. But every day you put your emphasis on, you would do that glance meditation, but you would still, in your everyday practice, know where you were through your own understanding of the teachings and through the guidance of a spiritual friend, your guru. You would know where about you should put your emphasis. So there's different kinds of ways of putting emphasis. In one sense, you put your emphasis on what the biggest problem is. Like if you have a big problem with anger, or a big problem with attachment, or a big problem with laziness, or a big problem with, addiction or lust or whatever, pride, you would, in one sense, you'd put your emphasis on antidotes to that, because those are the kind of things that prevent you even from practicing anything at all. But after those heavy problems are somewhat subdued, then you would put your emphasis on the first of the meditations, the meditation on relying on the spiritual guide, and a little less emphasis on the perfect human rebirth, but more emphasis on that than on death and impermanence. More emphasis on death and impermanence than on the next ones. So sequentially, you'd keep in mind all of these things, you'd get familiar with them, and you'd leave imprints in your mind of the whole stages of the path, but knowing through your own experience that in order to make higher realizations, you'd have to have the preceding ones. You put your emphasis on those preceding ones in your own meditation. So in a sense, what you do at first, you try to do this glance or panoramic meditation on stages of the path all the time. So you know where you are, where you're going, what the whole point of it is, put it in perspective. And you, as the yogis and yoginis in the experiential tradition, they would only meditate on one thing with their guru until they made that realization. Somewhat similar to that, you put more emphasis on the initial meditations until you start to have some understanding, some experience of that, and then you lead to the next meditations. Does that put it in perspective?
Yeah, it does. At first I was worried that he would have to attain direct realization, for example, of the lower scope before he could move on to the middling scope. I was bound up with that.
We say, for instance, we don't know what imprints we've left in our minds in past lives. It could be that we have not practiced at all in past lives, like me. It could be like some of you who have practiced a lot in past lives, and with a little bit of meditation, you start to develop these realizations. We usually don't talk about direct perception of the meditations of the lower realm. They usually talk about realization, like say to realize the essence of guru devotion. What would be the essential meditation there of guru devotion? Of the reliance on the guru. Do you know? Seeing all gurus as enlightened beings, Buddhas, and all Buddhas as gurus. This, when you do some kind of meditation that this is Shakyamuni Buddha, it's not that that's something separate from your gurus, or Amitabha, or Chenrezig, or Vajrayogini is one thing, but my guru is something else. So to try to see, when you have some experience of that. Maybe when you talk about direct realization, you talk about impermanence, we talk about inferential understanding and direct realization of impermanence, but the other ones, you usually don't hear the expression direct realization. You usually just talk about, some direct perception. You usually just talk about the degree of realization, your understanding of that, your experience. Okay. Someone else have some question? So let's just, if you have any, as we're just, we'll continue, yeah.
Faith, you explained the fear part going through different stages, different scopes and motivations. Fear would have a sort of different view or base. Faith would be the same? At the lower scope, you had faith that you can protect you from the lower realms, and the middle scope, faith that you can protect from sickly existence, etc.
I think so, and also much more subtly, much more profoundly than that, I think, your degree of faith, your confidence increases. At the beginning, maybe it is, in some of the Lam Rim texts, they say, for initially to take refuge, you need at least hope and fear. Because it's very difficult to have faith at first, like someone just says, the Buddha will. I mean, how many times have you been told someone's going to help you, or Tony Robbins or Mary or Amitabha. How do you know Amitabha is going to help you, or Skiti Garba or something? People tell you to pray to this deity. At most, at the beginning, you might have hope that will help, and that's like taking the first step. Like if there's a bath and someone says this is really nice, you might, or the stream is really nice to go swimming in, you might just put your foot in, with an aspiration that to find what you want, and some hope that would work. And then you put the other foot in, you walk a little bit further, or you start to sit down in the pool, see if it's not too hot or not. But your faith increases over time, and I think Dignaga and Dharmakirti, the famous logicians of the 700, 800 Common Era of Buddhism, they mentioned in their texts that really faith, really very, very strong faith in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha arises as you make more and more realization. For instance, if you have, through some degree of hope or faith, whatever we want to call it, you practice the path and you have some understanding of good heart, how it protects your mind. Especially, you have some realization, experience of emptiness, how the self that seems so true and has propelled you into so many harmful actions, so many disgusting actions, has caused you out of desire to waste your life, out of addiction and so forth, and out of pride, creating negative karma, demeaning others and so forth. When you start to see the emptiness of that, the truth of that, and how liberating that is, it's said that then you can develop incredible faith in Buddha as a teacher, that the Buddha taught this very, very profound subject that others did not teach. He taught it so clearly. Whereas the things about the conventional side, karma and rebirth and so forth, are things that you may not yet have as much confidence in, because those are actually, in a sense, although they're easier to explain, karma, conventional truth, seems to be easier to explain. Or even bodhicitta seems very easy to explain and understand, right? Emptiness seems like, oh man, give me a break. It's very hard. But actually, in terms of realization, it's easier to bring about a realization of emptiness, of selflessness, than it is to bring about a realization of actual realization of bodhicitta, to actualize in your continuum bodhicitta. So when you develop some understanding of shunyata, of emptiness, then on the basis of that, you start to look back at what Buddha taught about reincarnation and karma, and the fact that if you recited sutras and mantras, you would create merit. Then you have incredible faith that Buddha, who taught this incredibly profound, deep, and liberating knowledge about emptiness, why would he be lying about karma? Then you develop, even for those things which are more hidden in a sense, you develop a stronger kind of faith. So that faith, so there are different ways that the faith becomes different over time. In one sense, one takes refuge out of the objects of refuge, having faith that they can protect you from the lower realms. But even your faith that they can protect you from the lower realms changes over time as you make more and more realization along the path. So as you go back and you review those stages, even if you've progressed somewhere along the path, you go back to those earlier stages later, and your sense of faith that the Buddha can protect you, the Dharma can protect you, the Sangha can protect you from those, becomes more sure, more intense, more profound. So there's various ways that the faith changes also. Refuge is not something that you take only once. You know, oh, I took refuge. You know, I took my refuge ceremony with Lama so-and-so, or this or that. Refuge is something that you take again and again every day, and it increases over time. Does that make sense?
Faith doesn't necessarily, I mean, small faith maybe comes first, but really it's effort and practice that will develop faith as much as the opposite. They're interdependent, I guess.
Well, one of the things that's emphasized here in this section that Rinpoche mentioned again and again, Lama Tsong Khapa mentions, that reflecting upon, recalling, or remembering the qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, especially, let's say, the qualities of Buddha, recalling that again and again, visualizing Buddha and so forth, that is what can start to bring about some initial amount of faith. For us in the West, who, you know, we were not necessarily born in a Buddhist culture. Some of you are Oriental, some of you are from China. Were your parents Buddhist? No? No? Christian or what? No, atheist? Catholic. And how about your parents? Yeah. Buddhist? Chinese religion, so not necessarily kind of mixed, maybe even 20th century materialistic sometimes. But certainly people in America, if you just tell them, have faith in Buddha, it's hard to say that they're going to have faith just on your word. Sometimes by the presence of a great being like Choden Rinpoche, you start to develop confidence, the blessings of being in their presence and so forth. You start to develop some confidence that these things are true. But that in itself, that kind of faith has some value, but that's, unless you reflect upon that and check the teachings, check whether Buddha is a valid refuge and so forth, that is something that can be easily shaken if they meet someone else who's charismatic. You meet Swami so-and-so or Guru so-and-so, you know. So one of the things that's been emphasized here is to reflect on these qualities again and again. So initially, you have to take as a matter of information. If you have no other reason to believe that Buddha has these qualities, it's just a matter of taking it on the word of holy beings, such as Choden Rinpoche, someone who you have some confidence in. If you have some experience in the past that such things are possible, that there are lives that we have experienced before this, and that we will experience other lives after this, and that the experiences of those depend upon our karma, then you can start to add more detail to these various investigations. It's not just an intellectual thing, because just saying that Buddha has these qualities, that's not going to prove to you that he has the qualities, right? What brings about the development of that faith is by taking the first step, having hope, taking the step, then having more and more aspiration, following along, and as time goes on, making experience, then your faith increases because you see that things actually work that way. Okay? So why don't we, a couple of more people have come, so why don't we do a little bit of meditation in preparation for the class about some of the subjects that we've talked about. So one of these things is one of the subjects is the Buddha, the good qualities of the Buddha. So why don't you, first of all, just sit comfortably. Try to focus your mind by just placing your attention on the breathing for some rounds of respiration. Let go of other thoughts. Just as though you were trying to think of something very carefully, and you can make yourself oblivious of the sounds around. The same thing And meditation. Meditation can help you to be able to do that. Concentrate just on your breathing. Let go of the other distracting sounds or feelings or fragrances or whatever. Then try to imagine in front of you the Buddha, Shakyamuni, let's say, seated upon a lion-supported throne, as we've visualized before, a lotus cushion on top of that, and a sun and moon discs. Shakyamuni Buddha sitting cross-legged, saffron robe. His left hand is sitting in his lap at the level of his navel, holding a begging bowl. His right hand is over his right knee, the fingers touching the earth. His body transparent, an emanation of his mind. So think, this is one of the qualities of the Buddha's body, embellished with 32 major marks and 80 minor signs. Within the palms of his hands and the soles of his feet are the symbol of a Dharma chakra. His eyes are very compassionate. His arm, right arm particularly, is long from having given, so that in placing it in the earth-touching mudra, he's able to touch the earth in front of him with his fingers, even though the arm is tucked close to the body. So his whole emanation of his body is due to his accumulation of merit for 3 countless great eons for the welfare of sentient beings. His speech is able to, with one utterance, answer the questions of whatever number of people are inquiring. One utterance is understood by them in their own language, in their own way. His mind has the qualities of knowledge, compassion, and power. Knowledge of knowing each and every phenomena simultaneously without effort, like placing within your hand a transparent fruit that you can see the seeds inside and the flesh of the fruit, and even see the palm on the other side of the fruit simultaneously, not obstructed by any phenomena. So there's no doubt that the Buddha understands what we want, what we need, what we're capable of. His compassion covers all sentient beings, all suffering. It's not as though he has any partiality for some, those that are his followers, whereas ignoring those who have yet to recognize him. Greater compassion for all sentient beings than we have for ourselves. We might think we have a lot of care for ourselves, but the Buddha has even greater care for us and all others than we have for ourselves. The Buddha has also the power to bring about a change in our minds, to lead us, knowing exactly what we want, what we're capable of, what our karmic instincts are, what our predispositions are. If we, from our own side, open up our heart, open the crack of our rock-like mind, we can actually make these realizations with the blessings of the Buddha's omniscient mind. He has the power to do that. So again, visualizing Buddha in front, as you do a glance meditation over the Buddha's form, when you reach his throat, think of his speech, his holy speech, with what are called the 60 rhythms of Brahma, excellent rhythms, melodious qualities, and his holy mind, the whole body actually an emanation of his mind, not made of flesh and blood, not a result of karma and delusion, but manifesting just for our sake. It's said that if you reflect upon this again and again, the various qualities of Buddha, and as your knowledge increases, as you understand that knowledge, have more confidence that these qualities do exist through receiving the blessings of Buddha, that your faith will increase. Without this kind of refuge, based on faith in the Buddha, there's no sense even in practicing higher practices, higher meditations, and so forth. They won't bring about any greater results than taking refuge like this will. So then dedicate whatever merit we've accumulated this afternoon through discussing, through meditating, that we might be free of all the obstacles to hearing the teachings, being in the presence of such a great being as Choden Rinpoche, and that we might be able to make realizations even as he's speaking, as we hear, contemplate, and meditate on these topics newly, not just for information's sake, but to bring about a change of our mind. And in so doing, overcome our faults, develop good qualities, be able to benefit all sentient beings, and attain enlightenment for the sake of all living beings.